He's saying that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then one of those.
Somebody's full.
Yeah.
Hey, so we going pretty good. No, more.
That's important. I like that answer.
I know, I keep meaning to combine.
Hello.
Good, how about yourself? Great.
Morning.
Good, everyone fine?
Oh, you to Marcus, right? Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Morning.
How are you? Good, thank you. Good, see you. Good to see you. Good Easter?
I did, thank you. Thanks for asking. How about you?
Yeah, blessed. Yeah, good weekend. Actually,
It's been a long time.
it led up to Easter, the spring break for my kids, so.
Wonderful. What teachers are they?
21, two 16-year-olds and a 10-year-old.
Wow.
But the 16-year-olds are still pretty cool, and they're like too old for like that. So.
It's fun, yeah, no Marines break hunts, yeah.
Well, we do.
You know what's
Well, we put cash in it still, though.
My daughter who's 26. I called her up and I said she was the first half of the day. Mom, the second half, she came down and, hey, how are you? And I said, I'm still doing all kinds of things. She goes, of course. So she's forever loves Easter. Yeah. My son, not so much, he's younger. Yeah, same here. We got a yard here. We can still hide stuff.
Yeah.
She goes, I'll always do it.
Did you get it right?
Daddy will.
I'm the weekend.
Lucky.
I'll bring my name
We
to
put little notes in there too, like,
Yeah.
It's been really nice.
extra 45 minutes, or you can play 1 hour of the game on a school night.
There you go.
So, even though they're 16, they're like,
Really John High School.
yeah. So my oldest son, he's 21. He purchased he's architecture major, so he's always buying these materials and stuff.
Probably
He's
should
more
start
interested in like cash, you know.
Yeah, that was like district. Oh, I got it.
Yeah, in San Pedro.
Yeah, so yeah.
So they were like, I was.
Yeah. We're practically neighbors.
Yeah. I'm in Orange County now, but I'm just. I miss it. Long Beach schools, Long Beach State, Culver City. Worked for the city of Lake for 5 years. City manager's office, yeah. So I still got tons of friends in the area that I go see all the time.
And Long Beach,
Yeah.
they're amazing right now.
Oh, I know.
I mean, it started.
All going.
Yeah, but it started like 30 years ago.
They
right?
did, yeah. I remember when they started that, when they, to me, when they built that new city hall in '77.
So apparently it's safe for the most part, but I guess seismically, the elevator shafts might fall out or something.
I heard something, because my counterpart there was managed as a TV station, like, he and I heard from them, said that there were some kind of issues that they did, where they were hit back in the late '70s, so it's a redo. My brother and I have been to the Grand Prix since they started it.
Yeah, oh nice.
Oh, boy, that real time, that whole new shoreline.
Hike, everything.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? Welcome to the board assistant briefing. So as usual, we'll start at the end of the agenda for the public hearings. that's page 8. And we'll start with the public hearing, then we'll move right up onto the other item on this page, 26. But let's start with 27, amendments to Rule 219. I don't know how much of a briefing you guys need on this. We've been working on this for a while. I will say that we went to Stationary Source Committee last month, and there were maybe 5 or 6 issues that have not yet been resolved, and then they directed us to come back this month, and most of the issues have been resolved. I think there were 2 remaining. I think one of those has been resolved, more or less. There might only be 1 more, which we'll probably hear about today. But we've resolved most of the issues. As you know, 219 is our rule that looks at low emitting equipment or small equipment and exempts them from permit. And then some of that exempt equipment is required to register under Rule 222. So it's a kind of a grab bag rule. There's a lot of different aspects, a lot of different types of equipment in there. I'm happy to answer any questions, and then we'll probably take public comment.
Could you actually explain more on those both the
2 issues.
Rita Loop, UV, EV, LCD,
Right.
whatever it is?
Yeah,
Thank you. That was close. So that issue,
So
and then the
vapor sock.
vapor sock.
Okay, so we'll start with the vapor sock issue. So particularly refineries, they have storage tanks, and those storage tanks have various ways of keeping VOCs from escaping. And kind of the traditional way is you have a slotted pipe that a floating roof will go up and down, and there's a float on there that helps keep the VOCs in there. And there's an alternative technology now where there's kind of a flexible sock, essentially, you put over the top. And as it moves up and down, the sock kind of contracts, but it's airtight, or it's vapor tight, so it still keeps the VOCs in place. One refinery has been trying to get one of those permitted, which I think the permit issues have been worked out or about to get worked out, but was asking that that type of equipment be exempted from Rule 219. And our permitting folks, and Lockie's here, you can weigh in, just wanted to make sure that, not that they wouldn't get permitted, but there might need to be some conditions for those socks, some kind of inspection scheme every now and then, making sure there's no tears or rips or leaks or anything. And the request was essentially to just exempt them altogether. Right now, the tanks themselves are permitted. We have Rule 1178 that talks about what a tank needs in order to be permitted. We need to go back to 1178 and include vapor socks with a little bit of analysis to make sure that is a permitted configuration, which we will do. And so staff felt that 219 wasn't the proper place necessarily to just exempt this type of device from permit, because the tanks still need to be permitted. We just need to go back to our tank rule and make sure that's one of the listed acceptable types of controls. And then we can work on figuring out a way to streamline permitting or replacements if that's what happens going forward. Lockie, did you want to add anything on that?
I think that's to incorporate some of the inspection and maintenance procedures that will be associated with those vapor socks. It's a good technology. It's just that there is some disconnect between our current rule 1178 that we need to take care of before we start tackling it through 219.
Part of the concern, though, is that there's no manufacturer's warranty on the product. And so it's hard to grant a permit exemption when there's no guarantee on performance.
Correct. And when components in the tank start leaking, they leak in large quantities. I mean, they dominate the fugitive emissions profile of a particular refinery or a particular facility. So we want to be a little bit careful.
And Tracy, you've talked to the manufacturer, and I know you have a sample.
Right.
Sock, and you were also looking into the warranty issues, and was it San Diego? Who else is using it?
San Diego is allowing it. They do consider it a like replacement. Bay Area still requires a permit modification, as we're talking about, as does San Joaquin Valley and Santa Barbara. And, but you're right, there's the warranty on there, it seems like the most that they're willing to guarantee it for is 3 years, even though they have 10-year performance, but they're still not backing it for long periods of time.
Are they backing it for any period of time? Because I had asked for the warranty and
Yeah,
There's
it
no
doesn't seem like it.
Is the SOC more effective than the current system at controlling emissions?
I'm not sure. I know EPA has given it kind of has deemed it an equivalent technology. I don't know if it's more or less effective.
Right, so, frankly, we have not seen any past results, but from the theoretical standpoint, they're equivalent, according to EPA made that determination somehow. One thing that we have to be careful about is those folks only work with slotted poles. Many of those tanks have solid poles as well, which are a lot less pollutant than the slotted ones. They don't even need to be controlled. So inadvertently, we don't want to give them an incentive now to start switching the solid poles to slotted poles just because sticking the salt, is exempt from permitting. So there may be some adverse incentive there for them to shift in that direction, and clearly we don't want that to happen.
Couldn't the SOC just be part of the permit of the tank itself?
Yeah. That's what we do. I mean,
That's
when we permit it, that's what we do basically.
But they were asking that they can make the change without having to go through any permit modification, which gave us a little hard.
And in no other rules, like in 1178, we have the acceptable controls, and somehow at the time the rule was developed, I guess those SOCs were not on our radar screen. Is not one of the acceptable control options. So I think the best help that we can offer, or in the short time frame, is to amend 1178, make this as one of the acceptable alternatives, and then if necessary, work on the 219 and give an exemption there at that stage.
And that would allow us to do ensure proper operation and maintenance to ensure there's no leakage.
So no matter what you did on 219, essentially they'd be in violation of 1178 anyway.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, you can write an essay in 219 to take care of it, but 219 is not the vehicle to do such a thing.
Right, okay. So we're not there yet in terms of the SOC.
So we're including a board resolution to come back early next year for 1178 and consider how we can, whether 219 is going to be the right way forward. Because we could make the permit modification process simpler through 219 perhaps.
Got it, thank you.
Yeah. Second issue, which you'll hear about, is RadTech's issue on the UV, EB, LED, curable coatings and inks. So what 219 has in it already, before we do any amendments, is there's an exemption from permit for facilities that emit less than a ton a year of VOCs, and also use low VOC material, 50 grams per liter or less, and then another 25 grams per liter on cleanup solvent. So that exists today, and RadTech was looking for exemptions that could apply to the UV, EB, LED materials that above and beyond what the exemptions existed. So we took this, so just to back up a little bit. So those facilities that emit a ton a year or less, but half a ton a year or more, need to register through our Rule 222, which is a 2-page form and just describes a little bit about the operations and the types of materials they're using, and there's about a $200 fee that they pay initially and every year for that registration. So what we're proposing now is to require, not an additional requirement, but in lieu of that registration and in lieu of that fee, rather than submit the 222 registration, those same facilities would be able to submit now a one-page form. It's really a half-page form with 3 checkboxes and no fee, in order, and they would still, if they did that, in lieu of the 222 registration, they can also be exempt from a permit. Again, the same 50 gram per liter limit that exists today. The discussion at Stationary Source has been around whether we want to stay technology neutral, meaning, you know, many of the UVEB LED technologies do meet this 50 gram per liter limit, but there's other technologies that meet it as well. So do we want to carve out something special for these technologies versus the other technologies that may also meet the limit? The general direction from Stationary Source was no. And then the other question is, if you do exempt some of these facilities, do you exempt them completely? Is there no registration, no one-page form, no two-page form or anything? And it seemed like the direction from Stationary Source is we want to make it as simple as possible, maybe as inexpensive as possible, but we still need some record of where these facilities are for enforcement purposes, because they may indeed be exempt from permitting, but how do we know that? How do we even know they're there? How do we check that their usage is below a certain level? How do we check that their coatings are below a certain level? Because as soon as they're off the radar, then what happens? Then they might be using some different coatings, and they may be in non-compliance because they're no longer, they indeed do need to be permitted. So the general direction from Stationary Source was, no, we do want to make it easy, but we want to make sure that these facilities, we at least have a record of where they are if we do want to go out and check.
Realistically, if a facility is exempt, are we sending inspectors out to inspect non-exempt facilities? I mean,
Well, with the registration, I mean, now this one-page form, if this gets adopted, at least we have a record of where they are.
well, we're record, but I mean, you said for enforcement purposes, when would we send an inspector out to an exempt facility? Well, why would we do
Well,
that?
they're subject to other rules and regulations, even if they're not required to have a permit.
But they would be exempt from the,
Being exempt from a permit doesn't mean
You
you're
didn't
exempt.
answer my question. Would we send an inspector out to an exempt facility?
It depends. It's only exempt for that one process, right?
Well,
They could have other processes which we would have sent inspectors out to.
well, I'm thinking that when we say the equipment, I thought we were talking about an exempt facility.
Exempt from
I'm
permits.
sorry.
From permits.
Exempt from permits, different from, we have a whole range of rules and regulations, as you know, and there are other rules. There's plenty of facilities that are subject to our rules and regulations that get inspections that don't necessarily require a permit.
And
I
Lockheed,
can give you a very
Yeah.
simple example, Ron. The UVB curable facilities, just like the conventional technologies, they use cleanup solvents. Now, cleanup solvents are subject to our rule 1171. They're required to use ultra low VOC, 25 grams per liter or less solvents. So often the inspectors will show up at various facilities just to ensure that people are using those low VOC solvents. And occasionally they do find facilities violating that standard, and they get served with a ticket.
So it's also a level playing field, right? There might be some facilities that are registering or are subject to permit and are applying for the permits as they're supposed to, and then there's other facilities that maybe at one point were rightfully exempt, but they've changed their operations, they've increased their emissions, they've changed their solvents, and we would not know they're there. That's not fair to the facilities that have gone through the full permit process. So that's one issue. So what we're proposing is, again, this kind of streamlined form with no fee. And then there was one more piece of the rule. We did add in a piece that was in the rule before that does call out UVEB and now LED technology specifically, and has essentially a gallon usage criteria for which they would be exempt. And that not 100% technology neutral, but it comes out to about 60 grams per liter rather than 50 grams per liter. That would give an exemption of those materials. So it's a little bit of an edge for that, but in general, we try to stay, I think at the time, 10, 12 years ago, when there was more of a blanket exemption for these materials, those materials were outperforming the alternatives. There were higher VOC limits, and I think today, there's a lot of different coatings and inks out there that kind of have the same VOC emission profile than these UV-EB. We still want to encourage that technology. We still want to encourage all of low VOC technology, but it seems like a direction from the Stationary Source Committee, just last month was, we can stay more or less technology neutral. Is there anything else you wanted to add on this? Any other changes to those provisions?
So, what's the current language? Because I saw an earlier draft that spelled out UV-EB, and then the latest version for stationary storage, it was struck out, and it just had the 50-25 language. So what's the current language that you'll be bringing to the board?
Tracy.
Yeah, the language that was previously stricken, we added back.
Okay, so that's back in.
After discussions with the industry. So it adds back in the 6 gallon and the 125 gallon non-VOC waterborne, which is exactly what was in the rule previously. It was already in rule for several years, so we brought back that exact same language.
Okay. And the UV-EB?
Yes, yes.
But we did say it should not be a solvent-borne UV-EB, because we do know that there are some UV-EB technologies that actually do have much higher VOC content. So. Any other questions on that? Well, public comment, Peter?
Thank you.
So,
I have the usual handouts. I think I have enough this time. Oh, perfect. In the interest of time, if you could pass me down, thank you. Rita Wu, Director of Environmental Affairs for RATIC International. We represent about 800 members nationwide involved in UV, EV, and LED technology, which stands for light emitting diode. So a couple of clarifications on Lockheed's comments regarding the cleanup solvent. The actual limit in 1171 right now is 100 grams per liter. And we've actually agreed for purposes of the exemption to go down to 25. And that's on page 2 of my handout. I've summarized a lot of the concessions that we have made in this rulemaking. And to give you some of the background, in 2007, various board members expressed support for an exemption for this technology, and we had the exemption. And the way the exemption read was anything less than 50 grams per liter, less than 50 grams cleanup solvent was exempt. And that's the language that we had agreed to. Those exemptions were removed by staff due to requests from the permitting department that didn't want equipment to be exempt. Since then, in 2014, we came back to Stationary Source Committee, and Board Member Mitchell made a proposal to go back to those exemption levels, and the committee agreed. And that's where we pick it up now. 3 years later, the rule is back to reflect the direction of the committee, but obviously the makeup of the committee has changed. This type of technology is photochemistry, so it's different than conventional technology. There is no watching paint dry. These materials are quote unquote 100% solids, which means they only react with light, a form of energy, electrons, visible light, UV. They stay on the substrate, and once the reaction is initiated, in a matter of seconds, they will cross-link and form a giant polymer. Everything stays in, so there is no evaporation. We still report some VOC to cover for traces of material that could be impurities, but the materials themselves are not formulated with VOCs. We have companies here in California that are struggling to stay, okay? We are just trying to provide a little bit of an incentive for them to continue operating here. We have one company in Chino, California that makes a sustainable product looking like wood, and it's not wood, it's mineral oil, salt, and rice husks. And they coat it with UV, make it look like wood, and then put it on the side of Starbucks. You see those, Starbucks that have the wood siding? That's not wood. It's a UV product engineered to look like wood. Highly sustainable, so we don't think they need to be micromanaged to this level. On the technology neutrality argument, you have no further to look than H1B for plastisol inks to find out that those inks who compete with us do not have a VOC limit. So we don't think it's technology neutral to have that exemption for plastisol inks and then yet scrutinize our inks. I mean, if we're gonna be technology neutral, then let's be consistent throughout the rule. The 1 ton per year might seem like a big number until we look at other categories in the rule that have 32 tons per year. So why scrutinize VOCs for us, but tar pots and fuel oil storage tanks, which I'm not questioning that they merit that exemption. But then why scrutinize us here for records, not VOC content, because we still have to comply with every limit in the rule. And we super comply. This is a paperwork rule. This is a another record-keeping task and burden on the end users. We heard from Jerry Bonetto of Printing Industry Association. He represents 900 companies in Southern California. He came to Stationery Source Committee last week, and he testified that his members don't even know about all these registrations, because this is like a Boolean command if you were trying to program for Fortran. If then else, if not, then you go here. If not, I mean, small businesses can't track this. So if I'm asked to consult with one of these businesses, I'm gonna tell them go to Bay Area or go to San Diego, because I have provided you the language from the Bay Area, which basically states, any powder coating operation or radiation cured coating operation where ultraviolet or electron beam energy is used to initiate a reaction to form a polymer network. That's it. They don't require registration. They don't require additional forms. They don't require options of additional forms that people will be confused by. Ultimately, it gets to the point that it's so complicated for the end user to decipher that nobody's going to use the exemption, because they're just going to be too confused. There's liability if they get it wrong. And it's going to defeat the purpose of what we're trying to do here, which is trying to offer this district not only economic development, but emission reductions above and beyond what you currently have specified in your rules, which is about 300 grams per liter for printing. So we're coming in, we're giving you extra emission reductions, and we're giving you business. And if you complicate it like this, I know staff believes, it's a simple option, it's half a form or a full page of a form. I can tell you, and I know this from talking to printers, and you heard from the printing industry rep, their members don't understand all that. So it's just adding another layer of red tape and confusion, and it's defeating the purpose of what we are trying to do, which is create a win-win scenario for you. So I'm really hoping that the board will support our proposal. We've already agreed to many restrictions, and we urge you, thank you.
Thank you. So I would just note a couple of things. One is San Diego or Bay Area are not extreme non-attainment for ozone. So their rules are obviously not as stringent as the rules that we have. I do want to say one thing. As executive officer, I'm responsible for compliance. When somebody tells me that there's a major segment that's in non-compliance, I need to do something about that. And we will look into non-compliance. The issues about informing and understanding the rules, I think you've all seen the half sheet. I know that staff has really worked hard to accommodate those issues. If you had a chance to look at those, if you think they're complicated, please let us know. I think it's fair to say that at this point, we have a difference of opinion. And clearly, the board's gonna decide where they want to go on this issue. But I don't know if staff wants to add anything further to that?
Just one clarification. As it exists today, if you're under 50 grams per liter, you're a small operation, you're under a ton a year, you're exempt from permitting. Today, you're supposed to, we're hearing that maybe people aren't, if you're under a ton a year but above a half a ton a year, you're supposed to register. You're supposed to go through Rule 222 and register. All we're changing is that instead of paying $200 and register and fill out a 2-page form, we've developed as an option, not a new requirement. You don't have to do that anymore if you fill out this 1-page form, which has, address of the address, just basically your address and a 3 checklists of, what types of equipment you're using, and you're just essentially certifying that you are eligible for this exemption in Rule 219.
Is this an annual reporting requirement or just one-time registration?
Registration is one-time registration, but $200 renewal fee. If you do this form instead, there's no fee. I think you will have to certify annually. You have to submit this annually, but it's very, very simple. It just lets us know you're there. You've signed your name to that you're eligible for this exemption. That means if you're going to go over a ton a year, or you're going to change your solvents, then it's just saying you're not going to do that over that time period. It's very simple. It's an option, and we're not adding a new requirement. We're not going as far as Rita's asking to completely exempt them from any type of reporting. They're still required to keep records on site of their usage through Rule 109, but they're still exempt from permitting if they meet those requirements. I mean, as Wayne said, the other districts don't have the same level of, they're not extreme non-attainment, they don't have the same federal requirements, and they don't have the same emission reduction needs that we do. There's still a need for VOC reductions, given our 1 hour ozone standard challenges.
When we look at, I guess to satisfy the industry, when we look at that equal playing field, I mean, we looked at what the comments were on the other side. Are we going to kind of maybe to address that, maybe set a goal of a time frame of when to address it, or to show that action?
The equal playing field
On the other, I guess, the competing industry, their exemptions and their amount of emissions they're reducing.
So one of the challenges with 219 is it's exemptions for a lot of different things, a lot of different types of equipment, a lot of different types of emissions. Some equipment it's not just VOC emissions, it's other emissions we're worried about. So it's kind of like I said earlier, a grab bag, and we revisit it every year or two and try to update it with the latest information and everything. And there's some things in there that have been in there for a long time, and we may not be addressing it this time. There are things we can look back as it comes back.
But I think the real issue is, are we addressing apples and oranges?
Yes.
And it's understanding that it's not, when we look at it from a level playing field within that sector that we're looking at, we think that's a level playing field. But are there different playing fields and there are different levels within the rule? Yes. And so is it fair to compare one other sector to another sector within the rule? We don't believe so.
Depends how many pieces of equipment are out there, right? We might exempt something that there's only 2 or 3 out there because the aggregate emissions are low, but for facilities that are doing these types of operations, there's dozens or hundreds, and you add that up, and it's something we need to track a little better. So it's very different.
And Lockie, you had.
No, you just said it right. If sectors, if there are different competing technologies within the same sector, we have a level playing field. The examples that were given are non-competing sectors. So there may be other reasons why we have those exemptions. They've been grandfathered. If we are going to look at them carefully today, maybe we'll end up reducing some of those exemption levels, and maybe that's something that we'll tackle, next go around. But at least, within the same industry, whether you are UV or non-UV, conventional inks, we have the same exemption levels because they are competing.
lastly, remember when we went through the dry cleaning changeovers and all that, and there was kind of similar things, just, even though we look at it, we know it's a simple form, but I think sometimes people are just confused on jurisdiction, AQMD, and who's this group, but with this, would we do some outreach to kind of, again, I know it's a one-pager and I've seen the forms, but do we send anybody out to kind of explain?
Well, you would
This is
hope that the industry associations would help in some of that dissemination, but I think, we can certainly look at, not necessarily a working group, but some type of outreach that would help increase awareness and requirements associated with that.
I talked to Jerry after the Stationary Source Committee about his statement about his members, and we talked a little bit about getting together and making sure that he helps us get the word out. And so I think
But it
this
does
is happening.
suggest that, according to Jerry, that there was a number of his folks who were required to do the registration, right? Who were unaware of it.
Maybe, it depends if
Unaware of just not doing it.
Yeah,
I don't think
I think he said that they just didn't do it.
but they
not
might
that
be
weren't
under
aware
a
of
half
it.
a ton a year.
Well, but the fact is, what happened to those folks? Nothing.
We're going to be looking
We're
into
looking
those.
into it.
We cannot ignore when someone tells us they've got an industry segment that is not complying with our rule. So we're gonna look into it.
Okay, any other questions on this?
There's only 25 companies that would fall under this new exemption thing, the new possibility to use this different form.
Well, again, now we have some new information that there might be more that would fall into this, but
Right.
when we looked and see how many were under a ton a year, I believe there were about a
Of
dozen.
the ones that had utilized the registration option of the 50 and the 25 grams per liter, there was about 20 facilities. But when we looked into those, half of those had materials that were less than 50 grams per liter, half had some that were higher that were still less than a ton per year. And so, but we had no way of knowing how many of those might have been, regular coating operations versus a UV. And how many of those might actually take advantage of this option, we're not sure.
But we also don't know if there's others out there that should have been registering that
Right.
didn't.
Rita had indicated at least one of the exemptions that she indicated was a competitor to UVEB. Would staff be able to, next time around, look at that category to see whether or not it should still have that exemption?
I think so. I'm not that familiar with it. I don't know if you guys are looking at it.
I think the issue on the plastisol, there's a provision that mirrors the monthly usage that she was referring to, that's for plastisols. But when, our understanding of the plastisols is that when we go back to calculate the maximum VOC content for the plastisols, it equates to the same amount, so we didn't even put any caveats for the plastisols. And so that's why it is equivalent, assuming that you're using no more than 60 grams per liter. Plastisols don't have that VOC content, so that's why there's no caveat.
So when you look at the 3 pounds a day or 66 pounds per calendar month, when it comes down to the plastisols and the EB non-solvent-based waterborne, that still equates to that 6 pounds, but we're doing it on a volume basis as opposed to a weight basis.
Okay, great, thanks.
Which again makes it's a little bit easier. It's another way you could fall into this, and it's a little easier to calculate the weight, the gallons. Okay, we need to move on. So, as long as we're on page 8, and the other kind of semi-major item on the agenda is item 26. So this is the report back, the 60-day report back from the AQMD adoption resolution on feasible target dates for transitioning reclaim to command and control. Staff has had three working group meetings, one of them a conference call with our reclaim working group on this. And staff is preparing a board letter interpretation to just kind of give the board an update of where we are in terms of that process and what our kind of plans are for the process going forward for the reclaim transition, as well as a brief discussion on as far as we think we can go at this point in terms of feasibility and to the timing. Yeah.
How you doing? You guys involved with this, I have a hard time understanding why we've been moving away from reclaim. And you need to give me some instruction on why we're doing this. And I was noticing that during the 2012 emission inventory, reclaimed facilities accounted for 19.6 tons per day. And yet since then, we've done a 12-ton shave, and we're looking at another 5-ton shave. And my question is, wouldn't that be a remarkable program to really reduce even that NOx? And why would we want to go back to command and control, which frankly, in my opinion, or I feel, is going to muddy up the entire process by having to go back to rulemaking with a number of industries.
The short answer is our board asked us to.
Jeez, that's a horrible answer. Sorry. Well, I mean, how would you get 17 tons out of 19 tons?
It's not
anyway?
17 out of 19.
17
The
out of.
12 ton per shave is to, and the 12 ton per shave was to the available credits in
Well,
the
okay,
market.
what was the?
That's 26.5.
Oh,
Down to
I knew it was
14.5.
about 5 tons more, but that would take it down significantly.
To 9.5, the 5 tons per day.
Here's my other question. I was looking at the emission inventories today. Explain to me, why did we go from 19.6 in 2012 to close to 25 tons in 2017?
Not sure what you're referring to.
Reclaim. On the reclaim, in the inventory, where you look at NOx, in the 2012 year, they said 19.6. And then they have different years afterwards. And then when you go to 2017, suddenly we're up to 24.5. And I
Okay,
don't know
so-
if there's a total
So 24.5 is not actual emissions. Okay, here's one reason that reclaim is a little bit problematic in terms of SIP planning. So in the base year of reclaim, when we're doing an air quality management plan, we look at the actual emissions from those facilities. So for example, 2012 was 19. When we assume what's going to happen in the future, we have to assume that the emissions associated with every single available credit is actually emitted.
Okay.
Right? So it looks like might not be a real increase, but it's a theoretical increase. Whenever we have an increase in emissions in an air quality management plan, we have to make up for that increase with reduction somewhere else.
Yeah, I got it.
If you get rid of the reclaim program, you can use actuals and projected actuals going forward, so you don't have that problem anymore.
But I'll go back to your statement about 9 tons by 20, whatever.
9.5 tons of actual
10
emissions
tons
remaining.
less than what we have now. And we think that when we go to, okay, we're going to do that 12 ton plus 5 ton. So when we reach that point where we go to command and control, we're looking at 300 and some, well, maybe not 300, maybe it'll be less than that, facilities.
268, I think.
268. That we're going to be able to squeeze a little bit more out of it.
So just remember that in 2015, we projected that by 2023, that if all the cost-effective controls that we identified went on, the actual emissions in 2023 would be 10.2 tons per day.
Out of 366 facilities, major facilities.
200.
266, okay.
Might have been 270 something at the time.
Okay.
But that's 10.2 with the control. We can argue over whether those controls are cost-effective or not. There were lots of arguments about that. But we projected that these controls were cost-effective. In 2022, we thought it was feasible to go to 10.2. Now by 2025, we have to get to some actual emission level of 9.5.
I just want last little point. In 1979, we had 300 of the 10-ton companies, 303 tons per day of NOx, and we're not going to be down to 10 tons per day in 2022. It just seems like maybe we could go with reclaim a little bit longer. I don't know how much you're going to get out of it, but I wouldn't think very much. And you're going to create a lot more work for staff compared to what we have now. Moving to command
reclaim
control.
the reclaim program, when we have to come back, what we now know to be more frequently than every 10 years, is a lot of work for staff and for industry to try to estimate and figure out how to shave such that we maintain BART equivalency. In some sense, while it might be more rulemaking, it's a little simpler to maintain BART and show that you're maintaining BART without a trading program. But no one is under any illusions that this transition is going to be simple or something you can snap your fingers and do. It's gonna be a very long process. So one of the things we're gonna talk to the board about is we wanna develop a transition plan that we can work with our working group and everybody, report back to the board, kind of lay out the steps, and there's dozens of different pathways to do this, and we want to work through all that, have a set plan, have a set schedule, and then we'll start moving into the rulemaking.
Just to muddy the waters further. The cap and trade ruling earlier this month, there was language in there that it's not a tax because the credits are valuable commodities voluntarily bought. Are we gonna run into a sort of a property rights issue with the credits when these things go away? Is there?
Yeah, it's been a position since the beginning of the program, since the beginning of air pollution credits, reclaim or otherwise, that those credits aren't property. So that's a really well-established.
That they are or are not?
That they are not
Are
property.
not, okay.
Yeah.
It actually says that in one of the rules for reclaim,
Okay.
that the credits are not property.
Compliance with.
So if I'm an investor holding a bunch of credits and they go away, it's just,
Yeah.
I knew the risk going, I knew the risk going in.
Right, and that's how we do shapes too, right? I mean, nobody pops up and says, look, you just cut my allocation by whatever percentage.
And Kurt, there's precedent for that at the federal level as
There
well.
is, yeah.
Well, they might pop up and say,
It sounds like it.
People will say anything.
Drop the microphone to the toilet.
Somebody's going through.
any other questions on this? This is an informational item. It's our report back. We are planning monthly working group meetings on reclaim for the foreseeable future.
So the report back, though, is the 60-day report back that was voted on from the HMP adoption. So this is that report.
Okay, any more questions on that? Any comment? We'll go back to the beginning of the agenda. We are on page 2 of the agenda. Minutes are not available yet. And then item 2, Mike, you want to talk about setting the hearing for the budget?
Sure, thanks, Bill. So this item sets the hearing basically for the item that was discussed at the board workshop on Friday. So just briefly, it's requesting approval of the golden priority objectives, for which we're making revisions based on the board's comments last week, the draft budget and the proposed fee amendment. I can go into more detail if you like on any of those 3 items.
Any further thoughts on industry's request to spread out that big Title V fee increase?
For sure, thoughts. I'll turn it over to Wayne. Other than a yes.
So yes, we're looking at a couple of different scenarios. So one is the scenario that we talked about, where it was for the Title V facilities, 16% over 2 years. So one of the options that we're looking at is spreading out over 3 years, just the Title V facilities. And that would be what was one of the options discussed. The other option, because the issue that was raised was the ability to do planning, is to look at it from the perspective of, again, just for the Title V facilities. Instead of doing 60% the first year, do 8% the first year, and then recover it on the second year with a 16% increase on the second year. So this way you'd have the time to do the planning. We would still recover it within the 2 years, would still allow us to meet the agency's reserves projections, more or less, as I see Mike shaking his hand, more or less.
It would, Wayne, I'm just correct, it would be 8% and then 24%.
I'm sorry, 24, yeah.
Wasn't there some requirement that you have to do it within 2 years?
Well,
You have to do it at least, though, you can't go less than 2 years. So you could, the health and safety code says it has to be done over at least a 2-year period.
Okay.
So you couldn't do it 1, you could do it 2 or 1.
so that's why we're looking at it, to accommodate planning, still do it within the 2 years, and then as requested, to look at it 3 years. So we'll have 3 options for the Title V. But for the non-Title V facilities, we thought that at the current rate, the 4% plus the 2%,
CPI.
yeah,
2.5% CPI.
keep that within the 2 years.
So is the revenue over those 2 years going to be the same as if you had implemented it in 1 year?
There would be a little bit of a lag, so obviously, let's use an example of a revenue base of $100,000. If you were gonna do a 32% increase, it'd be $32,000, right? So if you spread it over 2 years, it would be 16,000 and 16,000 plus some compounding, but just to keep it simple, it'd be 16,000, 16,000. This way, if we did the 2 year where it was 8% in 24, it would be 8,000 and 24,000. You would be missing, $8,000 that first year. But because the Title V facilities are a smaller, there's a smaller group of facilities, it's 380 some facilities, it would only be about $600,000 to $800,000 in foregone revenues. So in the grand scheme of the whole budget, backloading it wouldn't make a material impact on what we're trying to do.
100,000 here, 100,000 there.
So I say that relative to a $150 million budget. Obviously, $5 means a lot to me. I doubt I have that much cash on me right now.
And how many facilities again did you say?
Title V is about 389 facilities, plus or minus.
And isn't there a requirement under state law to be able to capture and for the permitting program to be able to pay for itself also?
Well, for the Title V, that's definitely true for the Fed.
Yeah.
On the state law?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything, I'm not aware of anything in state law
Okay.
that requires it.
Okay. Under the goals and objectives, and I thought the new format was really good. And I think staff had indicated that the goals and objectives were, of course, going to be used to be judging on whether the district had accomplished what it's required to accomplish. But if you look at the one having to do with meet standards, the item there is implement the 2016 AQMP. But if you implement that, that's not sufficient to meet our requirements for meeting air quality standards. For example, we don't deal with PM10 in the AQMP, well, that's just one example. So, how does that get incorporated?
So, if to be more precise, we could say federal standards, or if it is a priority of the board to meet the state PM10 standard, then that could be a separate goal. In terms of, for that particular PM10 issue, there's ways we can deal with that. But in terms of whether if we implement the AQMP entirely, we're going to meet all our standards, the answer is yes, but not in the fiscal year 2017, 2018. So we can't, our metric is not, hey, we met the standards, because we're not going to do that by the end of that fiscal year. All we can say is, let's look at what the AQMP laid out, and let's give us some kind of performance indicator that talks about how we're making progress. If you look at the AQMP, even the adoption dates of many of the rules that are part of the AQMP, I think the first one is 2018, and then a lot of them are in subsequent years because complicated rules we're dealing with, whether it's in facility-based measures or reclaim. But we wanted to make sure that we have a metric that says, look, we are taking action, rulemaking or otherwise, as anticipated in the AQMP on that schedule.
My concern is not about the timing. It's about that activity for something mandated by state law is completely left out.
Thank you.
I got a question about were you done? Okay. The 6 rules, were AQMP rules that we were gonna?
6 rules are actions, so I believe the commitment to AQMP for rulemaking, I think there's only one in 2018. I think it's the non-refinery flares, and whether that is, we can get to that in this coming fiscal year or the next 2018, 2019 is going to depend on the rulemaking process. So there's not a lot of short-term rulemaking commitments, but there is a lot of short-term actions.
This is a minor issue with me. There are a lot of times when we say these are measurement tools, actually they're activities. A rulemaking is an activity.
Yeah.
Can we tie those to, at the end of the year, at least report on what type of, how much emissions we identified that would be reduced by those rules?
Susan, you want to say?
Well, there is SB 1928 in that report that's supposed to summarize all the rule activities that we could use. And I think there was a comment from Supervisor Rutherford to kind of improve that format to make it a little more user friendly. So
Do it. When does that come before the board? It's kind of in the summer, I thought, but
yeah,
sure.
I think it's more in the
It comes in
summer.
the summer. So what we're trying to do with that report, which is thick and, very, we're trying to put an executive summary on there that does give that type of report for what you're talking about, to talk about the major rules.
I remember
what
once
we
going
achieved.
through a number of rules that we passed 3 or 4 years ago, and I found every single rule, there was no emissions at all connected to any of those rules for the entire year. They were all administrative, this and that, and no one tied any emission reduction. So I think it would be helpful if we're going to have those rules in that category, that there should be somehow emissions associated with those rules.
I think on the toxic side, there has been a lot of benefits. Quantifying those emission reductions are tough because we're talking about local community impacts a lot of times. So doesn't necessarily get us towards our attainment goals, but it is doing a lot towards protecting public health. On the criteria pollutant side, one of the things that was done in previous years is you pass rules like 1147 and 1111, and these are very technology forcing rules with significant emission reductions. They may have been passed 5 years ago with implementation dates that are just coming due as we speak.
But typically we would have emissions identified, what we hope, that's what I'm saying, can we perhaps have some identification that there were X number of emissions identified that would be, hopefully would be reduced by the passage of these rules?
Yes, we should do that.
Any other questions on item 2? 2A, I mean. So item 2B, just a brief explanation on what we're doing there. So this is setting hearing for Rule 1147. As you probably know, 1147 is the rule I just mentioned, which is a very broad rule covering pretty much all combustion sources that were not covered by any other rules. Again, a technology forcing rule. A date is coming up in July. We've done a lot of work over the past 3 years to identify any compliance issues that are going to come about with that July deadline. So we're definitely trying to go to the board in June before that deadline hits to provide some relief to the smaller sources affected by this rule. We've done a tech assessment that agreed with many of staff recommendations and then a few other recommendations, and we're trying to incorporate all that into this rule along with some other changes. Essentially, we're providing relief to the sources that are under a pound a day or have smaller equipment from the limits in the rule until, because there have been some issues with the cost of retrofitting some of these devices. So until these devices are actually replaced, they won't be subject to these rule limits according to this rule. The reason requires some explanation is we're just setting hearing, but Stationary Source Committee heard some testimony on spray booths in particular, and then some of the technical issues that they may be having with the low NOx burners that are being used. Some of this is new information to us. It was only brought to our attention recently, not as it was being implemented, so we're still looking into it. But Stationary Source Committee wanted a brief report to our board on this particular issue with the burners and the spray booths. So we're trying to gather as much information as we can. We will likely recommend that this set hearing be removed from consent calendar such that we can give a very brief presentation and then ask the board to approve the set
Is
hearing.
it true, maybe I misheard this, but that there's only one manufacturer who manufactures these low NOx burners?
There's
No.
one there's one manufacturer that has certified low NOx burners.
Certified.
If you have a spray booth, and those burners go into the spray booths of many spray booth manufacturers. There's more than one spray booth manufacturer. Many of them use this certified burner. You're not required to use that certified burner. You can use whatever burner meets the limits but if it's not certified, you have to do source testing. So we're not limiting it to this one burner, although I think there are some other burners out there who have had source testing and have complied. So this is the kind of information we're trying to present to our board at the request of Stationary Source Committee. It'll be a brief presentation, we're just setting hearing, but staff is recommending that we need to move forward with this relief or we're gonna have some compliance issues as of July 1st. And this is an issue we can continue to work on the technology side. Any questions
So
on
so
that?
basically, the existing rule 1147 has deadlines to meet emission limits. The technology's not there yet,
Yes.
so you guys need to provide relief.
Not there yet in a cost-effective manner, and this is something that our independent tech assessment confirmed with us that it would not be cost-effective for some of the smaller equipment. And there's a lot of other changes that do provide relief in terms of relocations and other things. Any other more questions on that? Okay, next one on page 3 is item 3. This is just to approve a contract. As you may know, back in 2013, largely as a result of that big hydrogen sulfide rotten egg smell that came from the Salton Sea and affected all of us, we put out a couple hydrogen sulfide monitors very near the Salton Sea. We have been kind of providing kind of as-you-go alerts to people who have signed up. You know, we do an advisory when we get the high levels. They're getting to be a little more frequent than we had thought originally. We're creating a good data set. This item is just to contract with somebody who can provide automatic alerts to anyone who wants them if hydrogen sulfide levels are above a certain level. And we're going with this contractor who is a contractor to EPA that does all the AirNow, does all the dissemination of real-time data for the country essentially, and so they're well set up to help us with this.
So Salton Sea question, yes, in 2017, under the QSA, this is the year the Salton Sea officially starts to die. And you did a fine job at an incredibly depressing film. Is there going to be increased monitoring, or kind of what are you guys doing with Salton Sea now that's supposed to start?
We have quite a bit of monitoring. You know, we've added the H2S, we've added a PM10 monitor in the city of Mecca. There's monitoring around the sea. It's being run by IID at this point that was set up years ago. I was on the committee that helped set that up. We're on multiple Salton Sea committees in terms of mitigation. Jason Lowe has been leading that up. There's now a state czar, Salton Sea czar, that the governor has appointed, and he's convened several workshops and meetings and groups. And then there's been some legislation about putting some money towards the mitigation. So there's a lot of activity, and I think as 2017 approaches, I think people are starting to get a little concerned. We're going to keep monitoring the situation and trying to contribute to science as best we can, but I've often described this as the slowest moving train wreck you can ever imagine, because you may not see the impacts, you know, for a decade or two. It's hard to get a lot of political support for immediate money and immediate solutions because of that, but there is some good activity happening right now.
Yeah, could you elaborate a little bit on the differences between manual versus the automatic? In the manual system, you're getting, from your sensors out there, you're getting communications to staff here. Staff sits on a computer and sends out an alert. Is that the way the manual works right now?
So we get the data, when it reaches a certain level, we'll type up an advisory, and we send that out to anyone who has signed up with, our EnviroFlash system. But what this would do is bypass the human element and say, hey, the levels are this much, and have some associated information with that. But we've had to do advisories, we do it at like a dozen days a year now, so this would be this would be faster. It happens on a weekend. This is something that will be more real time than we can do.
So this contractor would receive the information from the monitors.
Yes, well,
And-
not that they would receive it, they would set us up so it's automatic. If you got the information from the monitors that exceeded a certain level, the alert would go out automatically.
In other words, there would be no human involved between the monitors producing data and this alert going out.
Right, but part of it is also making sure that we have enough, what we call auto quality assurance in between there, that if it was a spurious data point, we could screen that out.
Exactly. And also, maybe this is not your concern so much, but okay, you have people who signed up for this. What about the general public that doesn't have email or text message capability and so on? How does AQMD have any responsibility, you might say, or take any responsibility for seeing that the general public is informed, or is that the job of various entities out there in the Salton Sea area?
So it has been our practice every time that we issue an alert that we also issue a news media alert to TV, radio, and print in the Coachella Valley. And they, in fact, have covered it pretty closely. So if anyone doesn't have email or internet access, but they have some sort of media access, TV or radio, which most people do, they still can have access to the information.
So they would still get this under their system, I assume?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Any other questions on that? Okay, Matt, you have a few items coming up, item 4. So
Item 4 on page 4 is actually contract for communities and youth operation of quality sensors. This is part of our AQ-SPEC program. We applied for an EPA Science to Achieve Results grant back in 2016. We were awarded the grant. It's a very prestigious grant. We're the only government agency that received the grant. But in that grant, we had previously designed to work with 2 environmental justice community organizations to get participants. One of those organizations subsequently decided they didn't want to participate, and so this is simply bringing it back to the board to acknowledge that we can use a different environmental justice community group. It's communities of Eco de Valley, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, but they're being paid to participate and sign up folks to actually use the sensors in their region. And so even though the overall grant is about $790,000, this is simply working with this one organization, and they'll be contracted to help us at a value of $82,500.
Matt, could you point out, because I know in the stationary committee there was some question about the geographic distribution that we would be working in?
Yeah, so this is a California statewide grant. This particular group has a lot of members out in the Coachella Valley, so they'll help us in the Southern California region, and then we're enlisting the help of other organizations, including the Bay Area, AQMD, and other CAPCO members to help us as we go through the northern part of the state. So clearly that's not our expertise in that area, and we'll enlist them to help us get participants. Any questions? So number 5, the next one is mine, is to execute a contract to develop high efficiency near zone natural gas engine. So this is a California Energy Commission project. They awarded to a group called North American Repower. So this group is taking an existing Detroit diesel engine. They're going to repurpose the cylinders using their newly developed fuel injection technology to help try to get the same power as you do in a diesel engine. That's been the criticism with natural gas. They don't have the same power and torque response as a diesel engine, so they're trying to develop a system to do that. They won almost $900,000 from the Energy Commission. They're asking us to provide a modest amount of $200,000, but the other partners are SoCalGas, and they're providing $150,000. So this is just to asking the board to allow us to participate in this project with the other entities I mentioned. no questions. The final one of mine is to award electric school bus projects. We went out for a program opportunity notice back in December, announcing that we'd be funding electric school buses. The program was hugely oversubscribed. Lots of school districts want to try electric school buses. Because we only have just under $9 million available, we selected school districts in environmental justice communities, and those that asked for the electric school buses, we're going to award one each to those entities for a total of 33 electric school buses to 18 different school districts, or schools rather. And this is the first time we've partnered with the Air Resources Board on allowing them to leverage other funding. So we've timed it such that they can receive our award, but then also get HVIP funding for an electric school bus. So that'll take up almost the entire cost of the school bus. So they'll be able to receive the vehicle at a net cost of close to zero for them.
Who is manufacturing the school buses?
There's currently one that's approved on the VIP list. I think it's Lion Bus. But then since we released the program opportunity notice, another manufacturer, Motive Power, has since got ARD certification. So now there's two vendors. And really that was the intent, is that we get more manufacturers to the market such that the prices will start coming down.
Sure. Thank you.
Any more questions? Sam, item 7.
Item 7 recommends to the board that we extend the contract for Westbound Communications for an additional 12 months. This is the contractor that the board selected through a competitive bid process last year to conduct outreach and advertising for our Check Before You Burn program in the winter months. Just by way of background, starting with this past winter, we split the outreach funds 50-50 between Westbound Communications and between the other half going to Google, about $250,000 for each. The money for Google goes for advertisements, primarily in YouTube videos. So we're proposing to do the same thing this year. We're still working with Google to finalize information they need to provide. We're planning on that coming to the admin committee next month and the full board in June. Meanwhile, this company, Westbound, did a successful job and at a very cost-effective rate this past year, even though we had a record low number of no-burn days because of the large amount of rain. We had 8 days, the last day being in mid-December. And when you have a lot of rainy days and you have some burn days, it's hard to get the media to pay attention to the fact that, hey, this is Check Before You Burn, everyone. So that was a challenge, but in spite of that, Westbound, through advertising with cable and radio, through community events, they were able to almost double the number of signups to Air Alerts. They also did a couple of innovative things with gathering pledges and doing some market research prior to the program launch. So again, this is recommending the extension of this contract for 12 months. The admin committee did not have a quorum, but they, by Barbara can give me the official word, they agreed that the item should move forward to the full board. Yeah, happy to answer any questions.
Has there been any checking as to how effective the program is? What percentage of the public understands that they have to check before they burn?
That was addressed in the market research. Westbound did a subcontract, so we did 2 focus groups, and they also did a telephone survey. And what they found on the plus side was that most people think that air quality is an important issue. Most people think that it's important they take steps to help improve air quality. On the challenge side, most people are not aware of Check Before You Burn, under 20% in fact. Most people are skeptical in the research of the fact that burning wood in your fireplace is a significant source of air pollution and has a significant public health impact. And most people don't want to get an email telling them that it's a no burden. So we have those challenges to work with.
Thank you. So, even when you do get people to sign up, have you had any polling after that fact to inquire, say there's been 10 no burn days in a winter, just speaking theoretically, calling them after the fact and saying, well, of those 10 no burn days, how many times did you take some action relevant to that?
So no, we've not done any retrospective polling. Part of the focus group I mentioned was that most people did say that they would be willing to not burn when they got an over alert. So the focus group was entirely residents who have wood burn fireplaces. But no, we have not gone back and tried to somehow reconnect with people and see if they in fact did not burn wood.
Is that feasible, or might that be too expensive an operation to warrant?
I'm sure it's feasible. I'm not sure it's within our budget. But we can certainly consider that because we do want to do follow-up research in this coming year.
I think you just gotta keep plugging away. Bay Area started about 4 or 5 years earlier than we did on the no burns. They started out with the same type of issues, and by now they have pretty wide awareness. We have a much more challenging market than they do, but once you know about it, you know about it. So if it's 20% now, you can get another 10 or 20% every year. Eventually you make your way up to a much higher awareness level.
We only have fires when it's raining, so.
Okay, moving on to item 8. Michael.
Sure, this is an item that just requests approval to amend contracts with pre-qualified vendors for 3 systems development projects that we're doing, 1 for the FMP program and then 2 for registration filing for a couple of the rules that we have. Be happy to answer any questions.
Just an update, the bill and the assembly, is it?
It's not for the permit, it's not for the permit application process.
Yeah, it was just the difference. There's a bill in the assembly that makes a little tweak to the FMP program, and it's headed to the floor right now. I forget what the bill number is.
That's not what this change is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a little FYI if you're Sacramento.
I can move on to the next item, Phil.
Go ahead, Mike.
This is probably the most important item here for everybody in this room. This is approving the support level for the board member assistants and board member consultants. So again, on here we run through a matrix that looks at the number of board committee assignments, the leadership role, the amount of effort that goes into the meetings. We run a matrix and then we look to see how many points does the vice chair have. The vice chair's dollar amount is set in admin code, and then we back off from that. So if your board member's number of points are 50% of the vice chair's number of points, you get 50% of the dollar amount that the vice chair gets. It seemed to be a reasonable approach that was developed about 2 to 3 years ago. Total cost is about $900,000. It's included in the budget, so I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? All right, Barbara, can you handle the next one?
This item is to extend a contract and appropriate funds from the undesignated fund balance for the legal office to continue working with our refinery expert, Glenn Jenkins, who has been working on issues related to why the Torrance refinery has so many power outages and what they can do to address that, as well as refineries trying to phase out the usage of hydrogen fluoride and other refinery issues that may come up in rulemaking and orders for abatement.
Got a question? This gentleman has been working with some refinery back east to phase out HF.
Well, I think he was referring to a refinery that in Scotland that he was aware of that has already phased out that. Any other questions?
Well, there's been no other refineries that have phased
Well,
domestically?
the
The reason I
first-
ask is, it seems that if our refinery folks could go and talk to staff at a refinery, which has
Right.
actually could be better than talking to a third party You know what I'm saying? You know, have experts talk to experts, but I don't know if there's been any domestic, I thought this gentleman had worked with a domestic.
So
No,
like,
no, it is, Barbara is right, it was a refinery in UK.
But there's no other domestic refineries?
No
that done this?
domestic refinery in Switch.
The only one is in Salt Lake City, and that's just a trial. With
In
the
Salt Lake
solid-
City, and that's to convert from HF to the liquid ionic catalyst.
And the one in Scotland was a conversion to solid acid catalyst.
So, yes.
And so the consultant is still trying to get that facility to disclose
Yes.
what they did in its entirety. But once they do, that's something, I haven't talked to Wayne about a trip to Scotland yet, but.
Oh, where you go?
it's on your list, right?
Somebody's-
Actually, the one in UK, they had 2 units. They switched to sulfuric acid, and they had also a pretty sizable solid acid catalyst. And now they are so happy with the solid acid catalyst, they are gonna phase out the sulfuric acid, and they're gonna convert completely to the solid acid catalyst. But as Phil indicated, they are not divulging their identity yet, you know, and
Wow.
I know they tried it in China, but Chinese stopped because the catalyst would get covered with the medium that you couldn't catalyze to the high octane. They also, it mentioned in here that there's quite a bit of stuff. So it's not just about phasing out HF. It talks about developing refinery rules. These are safety rules for HF, or is this all refinery rules
Well,
together?
he was originally brought on by legal for the issues at PBF in terms of the power outages.
Right.
But he also had some expertise that has helped us with the Rule 1410, the HF rule, and also, we're also working on a couple other refinery, like measures to reduce flaring. So he has some expertise that, led me to kick in $10,000 from my budget, but we think we'll be using him on various things going forward.
Okay. I mean, Valero and Wilmington would be a good example to look at as technologies. I think these two facilities are very contrasting of
Yeah.
Exxon not doing a very good job maintaining what they had before they sold to PBF, and hopefully they can get the bar, and then Valero being a newer refinery, but their technologies and stuff that they have in place. I realize they both run HF, but it'd be an interesting conversation.
We have a lot of information gathering where we're still
Right.
in the process of doing this. Okay, any other questions on that? All right, let's move, I'll just take as a group items 11 through 17, the reports. Any questions or comments on those?
Any, on number 15, the ruling.
No, I can never get past this meeting without. Okay.
Anything noteworthy in there? I just got a thing last night, so I didn't look at it.
Any what? Any changes?
Any changes?
Just
changes?
Rule 1118, which is our flaring
Okay,
reduction rule. It's just from June to July.
right. Okay, good. Thanks.
Excuse me. Okay. Page 7, the board calendar. Item 19, admin committee report. Item 20, not ready yet. Sometimes there's discussion here. Any questions on the ledge committee report? Or any of these bills? Anything else on, up to item 24?
Let me just back up on the ledge committee report. I think you all know our bill 801274, which is the smog abatement fee, which would raise roughly $166 million statewide. That got out of committee Monday night, 9 o'clock, on an 11 to 3 vote. So we had plenty of votes to spare, and there was a lot of general praise, I would say, from the committee members on the ability to use those funds for other purposes like ag, off-road construction, things like that. So we have strong support. I definitely want to go back and address the 3 votes that were no, and try to work on those to make sure that when it gets to the floor, that we have as much support as possible.
If I could add one thing as an update, Al Moritsuchi had his bill on HF that did not make it out of committee.
There was got an amend for indirect source rule authority. Am I remembering that right?
I think you might be thinking about the fleet rules.
Oh, okay.
So the fleet, is that what you're thinking of?
Could be, probably.
So at our last committee meeting, there was a desire by the committee to bring the item back to next month's committee. But at that committee meeting, we put out the proposed language. So subsequent to our meeting, I think it's Clean Energy. Clean Energy took that language and ran with it. And it's authored by Gibson, Assemblyman Gibson. We have no position on that, we haven't commented on that, but we'll be coming back before the committee on that. And that was the issue where there was some concern about, at least in ours, the size of the fleet. And there was one other item, it was the emergency vehicles, the
Vehicles that can't use alternative fuels because they have to go
yeah,
long
essential public
distances
services.
and that kind of thing.
I'm not speaking out of turn, but on 1110, because of the potential for both those refineries shutting down for 14 times, I'm sorry, for quite a while, are we planning to get an economic evaluation on what the impact is for the entire region?
Yes.
And that would be Northern California, possibly even some other states, because of it's a significant reduction.
When we have an implementation schedule, we try to accommodate turnaround times that refineries already shut down certain processes for.
I just remember when I was in Hawaii, right when ExxonMobil went down, I said, man, we're paying a lot of money for gas over in Hawaii. I came back and our gas was 50 cents higher than what I was in Hawaii. So I didn't know why that was until I read that ExxonMobil kind of shut down.
Okay, any questions through item 24?
Yeah.
None. Lockie, 25, anything to add?
So, last October, we presented to our board our backup reduction plan. So this is going to be our first semi-annual report to the board to let them know, giving a status update on where we are. So we are doing well. In the 9 months, we reduced the pending applications by more than 35%. So we're ahead of schedule. Our target was to reduce the pending applications by 50% in a 2-year time frame. So in the first 9 months, we're 35% there. So we have slides that I believe are attached to your handout or not yet. Have they?
They should have been.
They should have been. Anyhow, if they're not, probably you should be receiving the slides, so they're pretty self-explanatory.
It's really a great success story. They've just really done a wonderful job.
What's a working backlog? What do you consider a working backlog?
The working backlog, roughly, so when we started with a total pending application count of close to 7,500, 7,400 in that neighborhood. And roughly 50% of it was working inventory, and the other 50% was backlog.
So your goal is to have how big of a backlog?
I would say, we'll declare ourselves successful if we can reduce the total count to what is half of 7,500, 7,800, around that.
The goal is really to get every permit out the door in 6 months, but there are always exceptions because of CEQA. Power plants take multiple years, so we'll never truly get down to zero, but we're trying to
Not the
get,
big ones, yeah.
with just a handful of exceptions,
Or applications that the person applying says, hold off a second, we're not,
Yeah,
you know,
But-
we're not sure what we're gonna do. Right?
While our work continues, obviously, where we are today is the lowest we have been in the last 30 years. We are doing well, but we are not declaring victory yet. So we think we can do better.
And you'll also see there's, in the presentation, and what Lafayette talked about is the automation efforts. And we should have this summer prototypes out for 3 different common, small types of permits to get an online permit. So we're making great progress in that as well. So that'll also help reduce the workload in the future.
So ideally, we see the big ones that may take 2-3 years to do, and then everyone else, we should only just have a 6-month
Maximum,
backlog.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not subject to CEQA, if you're not subject to, I don't know, risk assessments, which take multiple months, multiple years often, the rest we should be able to get them completed within the 6-month timeframe, perhaps even sooner. At least the automation efforts that we are engaged with. Well, we are already making some investments. The automation efforts, we are trying to develop some online permitting tools where you as an applicant, you can go in, you don't even have to interface with any of our permitting engineers. You can log in all your information and the program will do the calculation for you. And if you're below our thresholds, you'll be able to get your permit from your printer without even interfacing with us. And even if you have to interface with us, everything will be electronically. So we are starting with 3 processes, 3 commonly used processes as a first step on a multi-step process. So, and it's going to be basically, depending on how long you want to work and insert data into the program, you'll be able to get your permit, in a matter of hours, days. It will be up to you, not up to us.
All right.
Okay, that's the agenda. Any additional public comments on the agenda? Other business? Any public comments on anything not on the agenda? All right, we'll adjourn. Thank you very much.
See you guys. Fun.